The apartment was quiet that night. Just the usual sounds. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The faint noise of cars passing by on the street below. The kind of peaceful evening where time seems to move slowly, and you can actually hear yourself think. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop screen. The blue light made his face glow in the otherwise dark room. He had been working for hours trying to finish a project that was due the next morning. Coffee cups were scattered around him. Empty snack wrappers lay on the table. It was one of those nights where he'd lost track of time completely. She had texted him earlier in the day. Something about having to work late. Maybe until midnight, she'd said. He remembered feeling a little relieved if he was being honest with himself. Not because he didn't want to see her, but because it meant he could focus on his work without feeling guilty. He could order whatever food he wanted, stay up as late as needed, and not worry about being a bad partner for ignoring her. The clock on his computer showed 10:15 p.m. He stretched his arms above his head, feeling his back crack from sitting in the same position for too long. His eyes were tired, that burning sensation you get when you've been staring at a screen for way too long. He was thinking about taking a break, maybe watching something mindless on his phone for a few minutes, just to give his brain a rest. That's when he heard it, the sound of a key sliding into the lock. His first thought was simple. She must have finished work early. Maybe the place wasn't busy tonight. Or perhaps they'd sent her home because they had too many people on shift. It happened sometimes. He didn't think much of it. Just glanced toward the door, ready to say hello and ask how her night went. But the door didn't open right away. The key had turned. He'd heard the lock click. But there was this pause. Like someone standing on the other side, hand on the doorknob, deciding whether to come in or not. It was strange, unusual. The kind of moment that makes your instincts perk up even when you don't know why. When the door finally opened, it moved slowly. Not the normal way someone walks into their own home after a long day. Not tired or rushed or casual. It was deliberate, controlled, like every movement was planned. The door swung open inch by inch and he found himself staring, his fingers frozen above his keyboard. She stepped inside. Just one step, then stopped. The hallway light behind her created a silhouette. And for a second he couldn't see her face clearly, but he could feel something. The energy in the room had changed instantly. The comfortable quiet he'd been enjoying suddenly felt heavy, thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. Then she moved into the light, and he saw her eyes. That's what he would remember most later. Not what she was wearing, not whether she looked tired from work. Just her eyes. They were locked on him with an intensity that made his stomach drop. It wasn't anger exactly. Anger would have been easier to understand. This was something colder, more focused. Like she was looking right through him and seeing everything he'd tried to hide. She didn't say anything, didn't offer the usual greeting. No tired smile, no comment about how her shift went. She just stood there, breathing steadily, watching him. The silence stretched out, growing more uncomfortable with each passing second. He wanted to say something, to break the tension, to ask what was wrong. But the words caught in his throat. His mind started racing, trying to figure out what he'd done. Had he forgotten something important? Was it their anniversary? No, that was months away. Her birthday? No, that had just passed and they'd celebrated it together. Had he said something stupid in a text message earlier? He mentally scrolled through their last few conversations, looking for anything that might have upset her. Nothing came to mind. Everything had seemed normal. Fine. Or at least that's what he'd thought. She finally moved again, stepping fully into the apartment and closing the door behind her. The click of the door shutting sounded unnaturally loud. Final, like something being sealed. She reached down and placed her bag on the floor next to the door. Not dropped, not tossed, placed, gently, with the same careful, deliberate movement she'd used to open the door. He closed his laptop. The screen went dark, plunging the room into near darkness except for the light coming from the hallway. He could barely see her face now, but he could still feel her eyes on him, watching, waiting. His heart was beating faster, that anxious feeling in his chest when you know something bad is about to happen but you don't know what, when you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. He'd felt this way before. As a kid when he knew he was in trouble but was waiting for his parents to confront him. The anticipation was almost worse than whatever punishment would come. Hey, he finally managed to say. His voice sounded weird, too casual, like he was trying too hard to seem normal. "You're home early. How was work?" She didn't answer right away, just kept looking at him. Then slowly she walked further into the room. Not toward him exactly, but not away either. She moved to the side toward the window, where she could see him more clearly in the dim light from outside. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that's actually more frightening than yelling would be, because it means someone has had time to think, to process, to decide exactly what they want to say. Those 4 words, "We need to talk." Everyone knows what that means. Nothing good ever follows those words. His mouth went dry. He shifted in his chair, suddenly aware of how trapped he felt at his desk. Should he stand up? Should he stay sitting? What was the right thing to do here? "Okay," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "About what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up her face as she unlocked it, and in that moment he saw her expression clearly. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was something else entirely. Determined. Resolved. Like someone who had made a difficult decision and was now following through with it. She touched the screen a few times, scrolling through something. He couldn't see what from where he was sitting. Then she walked over to where he sat and placed the phone on the desk between them. Face up, screen glowing. He looked down at it. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. It took his brain a moment to process, to recognize. Then his blood ran cold. His hand started to shake slightly. That sick feeling in your stomach when you realize you've been caught, when there's no way to talk yourself out of something, when the truth is right there in front of you, undeniable. On the screen were messages. His messages. Conversations he thought were private. Words he'd typed late at night when she was asleep or at work. Jokes he'd shared. Compliments he'd given. All to someone else. Someone at work. Someone who wasn't her. The room seemed to tilt. Time slowed down. He looked up from the phone to her face, and in that moment he understood. She knew everything. And judging by the calm way she was handling this, she'd known for a while. This wasn't a new discovery. This was confrontation she'd been preparing for. His mind went blank. All the excuses he might have made disappeared. All the explanations that seemed reasonable in his head now felt pathetic. Because the evidence was right there. Clear, obvious, impossible to deny. The night he'd thought would be peaceful and ordinary had just become something else entirely, and there was no going back. He stared at the phone screen, feeling like his brain had stopped working. The messages glowed up at him. His own words. Things he'd written weeks ago. Some from just a few days back. All there. All saved. All proof of what he'd been doing. He started, but the words died before they could become a full sentence. What was there to say? Deny it? The evidence was right in front of him. Make an excuse? What excuse could possibly make this okay? She picked up the phone and sat down on the couch across from his desk. Not close to him. The distance between them suddenly felt like miles. She held the phone in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it anymore. She was looking at him. Really looking at him. The way you look at someone when you're trying to figure out if you ever really knew them at all. "When did you find out?" he asked. His voice came out rough. Like he'd been running. Like he couldn't quite catch his breath. 3 weeks ago, she said simply. 3 weeks. The words hit him like a punch. 3 weeks she'd been carrying this. 3 weeks she'd known and said nothing. 3 weeks of normal conversations and regular dinners and goodnight kisses. All while she knew what he'd been doing behind her back. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. She let out a small laugh. Not a happy one. The kind of laugh you make when something is so absurd you don't know how else to react. "Because I needed to be sure. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I said anything. And I needed to decide what I was going to do about it." He felt sick. Really physically sick. Like he might actually throw up right there. He'd spent 3 weeks acting normal. Thinking everything was fine. Meanwhile, she'd been watching him. Knowing, testing him maybe. Seeing if he'd come clean on his own. And he hadn't. Of course he hadn't. He just kept going like nothing was wrong. It started with a notification, she continued. Her voice still that same unsettling calm. "You left your phone on the counter while you were in the shower." The screen lit up. "I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't even thinking about it." but I saw the name. And I saw enough of the message preview to know it wasn't about work. He remembered that day. He'd come home from work, jumped in the shower. His phone had been on the counter. He'd thought nothing of it. Why would he? She'd never gone through his phone before. They'd trusted each other. Or at least he thought they had. Maybe she thought they had too until that moment. I told myself I was being paranoid, she went on, that I was reading too much into it, that there was probably a perfectly innocent explanation. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That little voice in my head kept asking questions. So one night, while you were asleep, I looked. She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was describing something mundane, like she was telling him what she'd had for lunch. But he could hear the pain underneath, could see it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way her fingers gripped the phone just a little too hard. I sat in the bathroom at 2 a.m, reading through months of your messages. Do you know what that feels like? She paused, but it wasn't really a question she expected him to answer. To sit there in the dark, reading your partner's conversations with someone else, seeing them say things they used to say only to you. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, to wake up and discover this was all a nightmare. But it wasn't. This was real. This was happening. And he'd caused it. Every bit of it. Nothing happened, he said weakly. I mean, nothing physical. We just talked. The look she gave him made him wish he'd kept his mouth shut. You just talked, she repeated. You just talked. Do you really think that makes it better? Do you think the fact that you didn't sleep with her makes this okay? No, I just meant, I know what you meant, she cut him off. You meant that because you didn't cross that particular line, it doesn't count as cheating. That's what you tell yourself, right?
That's how you sleep at night?
He had no answer, because she was right. That was exactly what he'd been telling himself. That it was just conversation, just harmless flirting, that it didn't mean anything because nothing physical happened. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing how ridiculous it sounded, made him realize how wrong he'd been. Do you know what hurt the most? She asked. It wasn't even the messages themselves. It was the dates. I could see when they started. I could see how they changed over time, how you went from talking about work stuff to talking about personal things, how the tone shifted, how you started using those little emojis, the same ones you used to send to me. She scrolled through the phone as she talked, not really looking at it, just needing something to do with her hands. I could map it out. I could see exactly when you started pulling away from me, when you stopped asking about my day, when you started working late more often, when you'd be on your phone during dinner and then quickly close whatever you were looking at when I came near. Every word was like a knife, because every word was true. He had done all those things. He'd been so careful about hiding the messages, about deleting conversations, about keeping his phone face down, but he hadn't been careful about hiding the changes in himself. The way he'd emotionally checked out of their relationship while physically still being there. There was this one message, she continued, from about 2 months ago. You told her about that thing that happened with your dad, the argument you guys had, the one that really upset you. Remember that? He remembered. His dad had said something that had really hurt him. Something about his career choices. About how he was wasting his potential. It had bothered him for days. You told her all about it. In detail. How it made you feel. What you were thinking. You opened up to her about something really personal. She paused, and for the first time her voice wavered slightly. You never told me. I'm your girlfriend. I live with you. I was right here. But you chose to share that with her instead. The silence that followed was crushing. He had no defense. No explanation. She was right. He'd shared things with his coworker. Things he should have shared with her. Important things. Real things. He'd built an emotional connection with someone else while letting his relationship with her fade into something routine and surface level. Why? She asked. It was the simplest question, but also the hardest to answer. Why her? Why not just talk to me? If something was missing in our relationship, why not tell me instead of finding it somewhere else? He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Tried to find words that would make sense. I don't know, he finally said. It just happened. We started talking at work. She was funny. Easy to talk to. It didn't feel like anything serious. It felt like having a friend. A friend, she repeated. A friend you complimented on her appearance. A friend you told you were thinking about. A friend you shared things with that you kept from me. That's what you call it? A friend? Her voice was getting harder now. The calm was cracking. You know what the worst message was? The one from last week, when she asked if you were happy, and you said you didn't know, that you felt stuck, that you wondered sometimes what else was out there. You said all of that to her, while I was at home planning our vacation, looking at apartments we might move into together, building a future that you were already questioning. He felt tears starting to form, not because he felt sorry for himself, but because he was finally understanding what he'd done. The betrayal wasn't just in the messages. It was in every moment he'd let her believe everything was fine while secretly having doubts, while seeking emotional support from someone else, while building a connection that took away from what they had. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt pathetic, inadequate, but they were all he had. She nodded slowly. "I'm sure you are now that you're caught. But were you sorry yesterday? Were you sorry last week when you sent her a good morning text before you said anything to me? Were you sorry when you made plans to grab coffee with her and told me you were working through lunch?" Each question landed like a blow, because the answer to all of them was no. He hadn't been sorry. He'd been enjoying it. The attention, the excitement, the feeling of something new. He'd been so caught up in that he hadn't stopped to think about what he was destroying. The hours that followed felt like years. They talked through the entire night. Or rather, she talked and he listened. Really listened. Maybe for the first time in months. The sun started to come up outside the window, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and they were still sitting there. Still going through everything. Still pulling apart their relationship piece by piece to see where it had all gone wrong. She told him about all the little moments she'd noticed. Things he thought he'd hidden so well. The way he'd become protective of his phone, always keeping it face down, always taking it with him even to the bathroom. How he'd started staying up later, claiming he was working, but she could hear him typing in a way that didn't sound like work. Quick bursts of typing, then waiting, then quick bursts again. The rhythm of a conversation, not a project. "I started paying attention to everything," she said. "It became like a puzzle I couldn't stop trying to solve. I'd watch you during dinner, see you smile at your phone, and I'd try to figure out what was making you smile. Because it certainly wasn't me. I'd stopped being able to make you smile like that months ago." She talked about how she'd started doubting herself, wondering what was wrong with her. Why she wasn't enough anymore. She'd looked at herself in the mirror differently, trying to see what he saw, trying to figure out what she lacked that made him need to find something else somewhere else. "I changed my schedule at work," she admitted. "Started taking extra shifts. Because being at home felt lonely even when you were there. At least at work, I was around people who actually seemed to notice I existed, who asked how I was doing and actually cared about the answer. That hit hard. He'd noticed she was working more, but he'd been relieved. More time for him to message his coworker without worrying about getting caught. More time to live in that fantasy world where he could have both. The stability of a relationship and the excitement of something new. He'd been so selfish, so incredibly thoughtlessly selfish. She asked him questions, detailed questions about when it started, how often they talked, what they talked about, whether he'd thought about leaving, whether he'd compared them, whether he'd imagined a different life, and he answered as honestly as he could, even though every answer seemed to hurt her more. But here's what surprised him. As painful as it all was, she never yelled, never threw anything, never called him names. She stayed calm, controlled, like she'd already processed the anger and moved past it to something else. Something colder and more final. "I cried for 3 weeks," she told him as the sun got higher. "Every day. Sometimes at work, in the bathroom during my breaks. Sometimes in the car before coming home. Sometimes late at night while you slept next to me. Completely unaware. I cried until I didn't have tears left. Until I felt empty. And then, somewhere in that emptiness, I found something else. Clarity." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the morning. "I realized that I'd been making myself small. Not just in this relationship, but in my whole life. I'd been so focused on being the perfect girlfriend that I'd forgotten to be myself. I stopped hanging out with my friends as much because I wanted to spend time with you. I gave up hobbies I loved because you weren't interested in them. I stopped talking about my dreams because they seemed to bore you." He wanted to protest, to say that wasn't true, but he couldn't, because it was true. He remembered her talking about wanting to take painting classes. He'd said something like, "if that's what you want," in a tone that made it clear he thought it was a waste of time. She'd never mentioned it again. She'd loved hiking, but he'd always found excuses not to go, so she'd stopped asking. Slowly, piece by piece, She'd trimmed away parts of herself to fit into what she thought he wanted. "The thing is," she continued, still looking out the window, "I did that to myself. You didn't force me to, but you let me. You benefited from it. You had a girlfriend who was always available, always accommodating, always putting your needs first. And instead of appreciating that, instead of recognizing the sacrifice, you took it for granted. You got bored, and you went looking for excitement somewhere else." She turned to face him then. "Do you know what kept me up at night these past 3 weeks? It wasn't even the betrayal. It was wondering if you ever really loved me, or if you just loved how easy I made things for you." "I do love you," he said quickly, desperately. "I love you. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you." She nodded slowly. "Maybe you do, in your way. But it's not enough. Love without respect is just convenience. Love without loyalty is just selfishness. Love without honesty is just pretending." The words hung in the air. He felt them settling over him like a weight. She was right. About all of it. He'd loved her the way you love something comfortable and familiar, not the way you love someone you truly value and appreciate. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, and her voice took on a different quality. Stronger, more certain. "I'm not leaving. Not right now, but things are going to change drastically." He looked up at her, confused. He'd expected her to dump him, to pack her things and walk out. That's what should happen when someone gets caught cheating, even if it was just emotional. But she was staying. Why? "I'm staying because I want to," she explained, reading his expression. "Not because I need to. Not because I can't survive without you. But because I want to see if there's anything worth salvaging here. If there's a version of this relationship that actually works for both of us. But it's not going to be the same relationship we had. That relationship is dead. I killed it tonight." She walked back to the couch and sat down, but this time there was something different about her posture. She wasn't hunched or defensive. She was sitting up straight, confident. "I'm done being the person who waits around hoping you'll notice her. Done being the person who changes herself to make you happy. Done being the person who accepts crumbs of attention and pretends it's a feast." She looked him directly in the eye. "From now on, I'm living my life. I'm going out with my friends when I want to. I'm taking those painting classes I wanted. I'm going hiking on weekends whether you come or not. I'm pursuing my interests and my dreams and my happiness. And you don't get to have an opinion about any of it. Not anymore. You lost that right when you decided someone else's attention was more important than our relationship." He felt something shifting. This wasn't the woman he'd been with for the past few years. This was someone new. Or maybe someone old. Maybe this was who she'd been before she'd started shrinking herself down to fit into his life. "If you want to be with me," she continued, "you're going to have to actually try. You're going to have to show up. Not just physically, but emotionally. You're going to have to prove every single day that you're choosing this. Choosing me. Choosing us. And not because you're afraid of being alone or because it's easier than starting over, but because you genuinely want to be here." She paused, letting that sink in. "And if you can't do that, if you don't want to do that, then you need to be honest about it. Because I'm not wasting any more time on someone who's only half in. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who's settling for me while dreaming about something else." The morning light was fully streaming through the windows now. A new day, a new beginning maybe, or the beginning of an end. He wasn't sure which, but he knew one thing. The easy days were over. The days of coasting, of taking things for granted, of having his cake and eating it too. Those days were done. She stood up, picking up her phone. "I'm going to take a shower and then go to sleep. I'm exhausted. We can talk more later, but I need you to really think about what you want, about whether you're capable of being the kind of partner I deserve, because I'm not accepting anything less anymore. I'm worth more than that. I'm finally realizing I'm worth more than that." She walked toward the bedroom, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and obviously you need to end whatever this is with her, today, right now. If I see one more message, one more call, one more anything, we're done. No second chances. No explanations, done, understand?" He nodded. "I understand." "I'll do it right now." "Good," she said. And then she was gone, closing the bedroom door behind her. He sat there alone in the living room as the morning sun got brighter. His laptop was still closed on the desk. His phone was in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at it for a long moment, and then opened his messages. He typed out a message to his coworker. Short, direct, explaining that what they'd been doing was wrong, that he was committed to his relationship, and that they needed to keep things strictly professional from now on. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he deleted her number, deleted all their messages, removed her from social media, erased every trace of the thing that had almost destroyed his relationship. But he knew deleting the evidence didn't erase what he'd done. That would take time. Maybe years. Maybe forever. As dawn approached, the conversation shifted. Sarah began to speak about herself in a way she never had before. She talked about her own fears and insecurities, about how she'd sometimes felt taken for granted, about moments when she'd needed him to see her and felt invisible instead. She described the person she'd been when they met, confident, independent, certain of her worth, and how over the years, she'd gradually made herself smaller to fit into what she thought their relationship needed. She'd watched him drift without saying anything, hoping it would correct itself, hoping her love would be enough to pull him back. Now, sitting across from him in the gray morning light, she made a declaration that Marcus hadn't expected. She wasn't leaving, not yet, but she was done being the person who accommodated, who overlooked, who quietly carried the burden of maintaining their relationship while he took it for granted. If they were going to continue, things would change fundamentally. She would no longer be the person who waited by the phone, who scheduled her life around his availability, who swallowed her concerns to keep the peace. She was reclaiming the parts of herself she'd set aside, and he would need to decide if he could love that version of her, the one who demanded respect rather than hoped for it. Part 5. The aftermath. The weeks that followed were perhaps harder than that single night. Marcus had expected either forgiveness or a breakup, but what he got was something far more challenging: accountability without absolution. Sarah remained in the relationship, but she was different. She went out with friends without checking in constantly. She pursued hobbies and interests she'd previously set aside. She was warmer with him when things were good, but no longer attempted to smooth over tensions when they arose. She let uncomfortable moments sit, let him experience the natural consequences of his choices. Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to prove himself daily. Not through grand gestures, but through consistent presence and attention. He had to learn to be reliable in small ways, to remember details she shared, to show up emotionally even when it wasn't convenient. Slowly, they began rebuilding something. It wasn't the same relationship that had died that night when she walked in with burning eyes. This was something newer, more honest, built on a foundation that included their failures rather than ignoring them. Marcus came to understand that the night hadn't been about punishment or revenge. It had been about Sarah refusing to disappear in her own relationship, about her demanding to be seen and valued. The woman who entered quietly that night had reclaimed her voice, and his life was better for it. Even though the process of getting there had been excruciating, he learned that sometimes love isn't about the absence of betrayal, but about what you do in the aftermath of failure. That night, when his night stopped being his own, was actually the beginning of a relationship that belonged to both of them equally, something they'd never quite achieved before.